Hey everyone, last time we were taking a look at surrealism and its response to World War One as this interwar art movement. I want to take a look at a couple other interwar art movements that are happening. The first one that we'll take a look at is American regionalism. We haven't really talked about American art in this class yet. America really hasn't come onto the art scene until the 1930s and 40s, and then by the end of 1940s and in the early 1950s, New York changes to become the center of the art world, which up until this time, mainly it was Paris because of Louis XIV making the Academy of Art there so centralized and focused. And so Paris, for the last several centuries, has been the center of the art world. But as artists flee Europe during World War II, a lot of them are going to land in the United States, and they're going to start influencing art. Artists are going to start seeing the world, seeing modern art, and they're going to say, hey, this is kind of interesting. Let's do our own thing. I want to take a look at American regionalism, though. This is going to be very traditional in terms of realism. America really hasn't had an avant-garde art movement yet. The first one's really going to be abstract expressionism, which we'll take a look at later. But it's going to be very traditional in terms of its representation. But I want to take a look at some of the ideas and what it's evoking and how this is part of this interwar period, right? Just by way of definition, American regionalism is a cultural movement that arose in the 1930s, mainly in response to the Great Depression. And in the 1940s, it continues on up until World War II, and then a little bit after, that emphasized daily life in small town, usually Midwest America, right? So Midwest is generally considered the breadbasket of the United States. Generally, when people say, small town America, they're referring to the Midwest. They're not referring to California or some coastal town or the South. I don't know why that is. That just seems to be the way that America identifies itself. Its art expresses the essence of American identity and promotes a closer examination of people or groups that are generally overlooked, often those who are economically disadvantaged in rural populations. And so mainly it's going to be examining the poor, the plight of the poor. Some of its art is very nostalgic, kind of looking romantically backwards, and romanticizes the people it represents. And so in some of their art, they're going to say, hey, look at these hardcore, hardworking American values type people. Isn't that great? Other art exposes the plight of the people in these regions. And so some of them are saying, you know what, this area is deeply affected by its poverty, and we need to examine this a little bit more closely. Mainly, art in the United States got a booster shot by the Great Depression. And that sounds odd. Generally, art is always associated with money, follows the money, whether it's the Medicis or in Holland with the rise of the Dutch East India Company, or when in France with Louis XIV. Generally, art tends to follow money. That's a fairly common trend. So it seems odd that art would follow the Great Depression, but the reason for this was FDR's New Deal, right? The growing consumer debt worsened the stock market crash on Monday, October 28, 1929, and both signaled greater economic hardships. People could no longer buy on credit, causing companies to lay off workers, causing even less shopping and more layoffs. People lost their jobs and homes. Roosevelt believed government intervention could help to jumpstart the economy. His New Deal sought to put people back to work and inspire confidence in the economy. The New Deal proved to be inadequate. It didn't really solve the Great Depression, but people felt pride in doing something that gave them purpose. One program was the Works Progress Administration that funded art. And so in terms of, the importance of the art world, art does follow the money, and what this does is it gives artists a way to get a weekly paycheck by the government for producing art, which sounds like a radical concept in our day and age. But it gives artists the freedom to not be concerned about whether their art's going to sell. And this really starts the avant-garde movement in the United States, that artists can say, hey, I can do something new, I can do something unique. I don't really have to worry about whether it's going to sell right away. Because remember, the United States has firm roots in this Protestant work ethic, that it's all about, our ability to make money. The more money you make is the more you're valued. So there's that core that we have kind of picked up on, that we saw those elements in art of Holland. And we have, as the Pilgrims came to the United States, they dropped those principles as kind of the founding roots. And so it's always been a little bit challenging for American artists to be able to do something unique and different, because we're kind of shackled by what the market wants, right? What's being paid for. Where in Europe, there's been much more room to be able to allow artists to have that flexibility and that freedom. That's not to say that their new art is always accepted, right? Van Gogh only sold one painting in his life, but he wasn't so concerned about that, right? His idea was the process of creation. So I think in Europe there's more of that ability to have that flexibility, but in the United States we tend to be very pocket and market driven. The artists that come from the Works Progress Administration, Jackson Pollock, his wife Lee Krasner, Mark Rothko, Willem de Kooning, and Dorothea Lange. And so a lot of the artists that are going to be coming about in the 1930s and 40s get their roots in the Works Progress Administration, and it gives them that flexibility. We'll take a look at Pollock, Krasner, Rothko, and de Kooning when we take a look at abstract expressionism. But I want to take a look at Dorothea Lange. Dorothea Lange was submitted a proposal to photograph migrant workers that were suffering from the Dust Bowl, which was an extreme drought in the Midwest, and the crops died almost instantaneously, almost overnight, due to the severe conditions. And so you have this group of people who are already impoverished by being, poor local farmers, and now they don't have the crops, and so this drove them even to more extremism. And so she's photographing this to focus on this kind of quintessential American hardworking, life, in a similar way to what we saw with realism, exposing the plight of the poor. But this is happening in the United States. It's happening during the 1930s, during the Great Depression. And it's the Great Depression only exacerbates this, right? So as the markets are collapsing, it even adds more insult to injury that there's this extreme drought, that now there's even less to go around. And so here you see the migrant mother, as this is known here, going around trying to make ends meet. Her two daughters, who are either too, I don't think it would be a shame, I think probably too shy to look at the camera, and the mother looks out with a worried look on her face, wondering where she's going to live, where she's going to go next, how she's going to feed her children. All of the anxieties and pressures of a parent, but made more so because there really is this lack of hope on the horizon. And so Dorothea Lange calls attention to this. She's calling attention to the problems of the people that are experiencing this, to then bring these images to greater cultural awareness. Here is the children of migrant agriculture workers in California, right? So a lot of people that experienced the Dust Bowl in mainly Oklahoma moved west to California, seeking new work, seeking new opportunities, but they would only be there in a particular area for a little while there was work, and then they'd have to move on. And so again, calling attention to this. And it's not to say that this was, the only people that are experiencing this are these, migrant workers. I mean, a lot of people were out of work during the Great Depression, but it's calling attention to people that are largely overlooked and largely ignored. And then this one, women on the high plains, if you die, you're dead, and that's all. And that was the quote that the woman who she was photographing said. And as she looks off and just sees her crops just, deteriorate into dust, it's just a very frustrating, very humbling, very powerless feeling that you have. And it starts to cause people to question mortality, question life, have these deeper theological, philosophical questions about its meaning. Why did this happen? In a similar way that what we see about Dadaism, trying to make sense, right? So we could see her having that kind of thought of, how do we make sense of this? Is this for a greater purpose, or is this just something that happens? I wanted to show you Dorothea Lange in her own words as she's compiling this book. They put together a small video that shows her next to the works as she talks about this project.
How do you tell others about what you think It's worth telling. No one was ever given exact directions. You were turned loose in a region. And the assignment was see what is really there. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What actually is the human condition?
It's hard to get by. Between Buck Creek and Whitewater Creek, nobody can make a living.
I remember when the Yankees came through.
Yeah, old Pastor hollering and told the Negroes you free.
I don't know whether that drought was the devil's work or the Lord's work. In 3 days, everything wilted.
This country's a hard country. They won't help bury you here. You die, you're dead. That's all.
This life is simplicity boiled down.
Yes, sir. We've starved, stalled, and stranded.
Living a bum's life should make a bomb out of
Born and raised.
it. Seems like
I couldn't do nothing if I went to hell.
Talking for the country.
A human being has a right to stand like a tree.
they don't
has a
stop
right
and
to
shut the door, they
stand.
just walk
You
out.
can't do no harm.
The human face is the universal language. The same expressions are readable, understandable all over the world. It's explosions of emotion and passion, all concentrated on just this part of the human anatomy. One day I was working here, and it came to me. The deprived and the dislocated. And then the word came to me, rootless, the walking moment. There was another phrase that was in my mind. The last ditch, the last ditch.
So, as we see within this particular video and within the works, the photographs that we have studied, she's trying to understand this idea of the American experience. What is the American experience? What is it to the, quote, common man and or woman, and trying to illustrate what makes America America, and exposing to it to a certain extent, rather than celebrating those that are, rich and famous. What's at the real core, right? The true American, as one might say, right? Which that's kind of a loaded, complex term. But the gist of American regionalism, right? Let's take a look at another American regionalist, Grant Wood. You guys have seen this painting before, American Gothic. He's associated with American realism. His works display the quintessential American identity, which makes us question, right? What is it that we are promoting as the quintessential American identity, right? Where does they come from? Why do they have to come from this location? Who are they? What race are they? What socioeconomic class are they? There's a lot of questions that we can start to pull apart as we start thinking about what is the true American. His figures are of a small town, rural life in the Midwest. They are realistic and express traditional Puritan values of simplicity, hard work, and strictness. And so we can start thinking about the ideas that we discussed with Dutch Baroque. They demonstrate a nostalgia for what some felt was a vanishing way of life. And so this idea of trying to capture the true essence of America, hard work, this farmer with his pitchfork in his hand, wearing a coat over his overalls. He's associated with work, labor, very similar to what we see with Van Gogh's The Potato Eaters, right? Working with his hands to make ends meet and to support his family. And a younger woman, presumably his daughter, stands next to them. This is the family. They are founded upon this idea of rural America. They're not part of Fifth Avenue. They're not part of Wall Street. These people are just common, down-to-earth people, which is the essence, the backbone of America, right? That's the idea, right? Question to think about. Woods' works display a folksiness about a romanticized image of America, what is being romanticized and what is he celebrating in them, right? So what is it that he's celebrating about these characters that he's representing? But another question to think about them in connection, right? Just I like to think about these, to see the forest between the trees in these discussion questions. I don't want to answer for you. I want you to be able to do your own thought, to make your own connections for them. I'll give you the context, I'll give you the content, but then I want you to be able to continue thinking about them beyond the confines of this lecture. And most times we'll come back during our Zoom meetings and we'll talk about them, right? While Lang and Wood share many values in how they represent rural life, there are several differences. Where Grant Wood celebrates rural life, Dorothea Lange expresses concerns about the effects of this way of life. They both have very different visions of rural life and its impact, right? What does Dorothea Lange call attention to? What might Wood's work fail to address? Which image do you think serves the people in these areas better, right? In terms of trying to call attention to, trying to create awareness for, or trying to celebrate, which one do you think does a better job of, casting a spotlight on people and what they need and what they value, right? So something to think about, right? In terms of, because they have very different objectives. There's some similarities in their objectives in terms of what they're focusing on, in terms of their subject, but a different kind of emphasis, a different kind of mood, a different tone within them. And I want us to think about what is the effect of that tone. All right, let's take a look at Edward Hopper, where Woods' works focus on rural life in America. Hopper's works focus on American life, generally in cities. This one is not. This one's kind of the outside of the city with a gas station in small town America. His works are similar to Giorgio de Chirico's, though, in that they show a city or show cities that are vacant and empty. Very little life exists in them. People seldom interact, and this creates a sense of isolation and loneliness. And so similar to, or within that idea, we see a gentleman here. It seems as though this is either early in the morning or late at night. So he's either opening the gas station or closing it, getting ready to go home for the evening. But he's all alone. There's no one else on this road. There's no one else around him. We don't get any indication of a town. There's this idea of isolation and loneliness, which is a predominant theme in the 20th century, that we become more and more disconnected. That modernism, urbanization, living in close proximity to one another hasn't necessarily brought us together. What we see instead is the deterioration of communities. We no longer live in communities. We live in subdivisions. We live in areas or urban areas that we don't really interact with one another. We might nod our head as we pass by. We might, wave as we drive by them, but we don't really interact with communities anymore. We have that sense of loss, and I think Hopper really represents that. Even though he's doing this in the 1940s, I think his works feel very contemporary, particularly in a post-COVID world where we were on lockdown for a year and a half, whatever it was. Where we were so disconnected. I think that really helped to emphasize how this, the age of technology and this digital age has moved us towards this isolation. Yes, we have social media. We can see what everyone else is doing, but are we really connected to them? And I think he sees that happening even back in the 1940s. We're living in cities, but we're not really connected. Here we see 4 individuals. One of them is working at the cafe at night. The 3 others come in there mainly to combat loneliness, right? They have their lonely apartments in the inner city. They work 9 to 5 jobs. And then what do you do after hours when you don't really have a community, when you don't really know anyone, when you don't really have any connections? What do? Do you either sit in your apartment and stare at the wall, or you go out just to be around people? And here we see the people here, they don't really interact. They're just here so they're not lonely, right? Which is another kind of loneliness. We've seen that theme before a little bit with Edvard Munch's The Scream, right? The idea of being in a world and then you feel completely alone and isolated. And Hopper has that same idea, although he represents it a little bit differently. This is not about the psychological break. It's just about how isolated and alone people really can feel. Notice how the streets are empty. Everything's closed down. It gives this sense of this dystopian feel of the city, where it's this irony of this impressive. A lot of life lives there, but no one's on the streets. No one's actually there, right? So this kind of feeling of emptiness. Here's an office in the small city. A gentleman looks out in his very posh corner office that he has at work, and then he pauses for a moment and looks out at the city, which is, again, empty and desolate, and there's no one else. And so as he looks out there, he looks longingly, looking for connections, but we feel so disconnected in a world of isolation, loneliness, and the lack of community, right? Let's take a look at Andrew Wyeth. He's also part of this, and so we have different artists doing different things in different regions, hence the term regionalism, but all demonstrating the idea of what is life like for the average person, right? Wyeth is one of the most widely recognized American artists. His works are known for the emotional complexity and profound insights into intimate scenes of daily life. And here's The Wind from the Sea. We see the gentle wind blowing the curtains, but it appears as though the window of this home, or in this home itself, is abandoned. It's been unkept. We see the shutters up above that have holes in them that have been deteriorated. We see cracks in the wall on the far left-hand side. We see the drapes, the gentle lace drapes that blow, that have been torn and tattered. We see the indication of birds on them, which is an indication of life, but ironically, this house is void of life. The beach scene that we see here which we see a subtle indication of perhaps a lake on the left-hand side of the window, has no life. There's no people. It's just completely vacant. We see a subtle road, which does indicate that life was once there. There is some type of movement of cars, wagons, something that has once rode down that road before, but there's no indication of traffic now. So it could be that this is just a winter or a summer retreat, and now it's winter, although they left the window open. That wouldn't be a good thing. But it seems to demonstrate this idea of there's a lack of life and a longing, right? Again, very similar to what we see with Edward Hopper, this longing for connection, but a lack and inability to find it. This is one of his most famous works. This is Christina's World. Christina, seen here, is paralyzed from the waist down. Her home is in the top right-hand side, and this is as far away as Christina can go from her home. So the idea here is that this is capturing the entirety of her world. This is who she is. So again, very similar to what we see with Dorothea Lange, giving us very intimate insights into very specific individuals, the migrant mother looking off to wonder where she's going to live and where she's going to get the next meal. We see this is very intimate into her life, but yet it has that certain level of connectivity for the viewer. We can identify with not necessarily being paralyzed, perhaps, but with the idea of being confined, wanting more, longing for more, and then feeling suffocated by whatever pressures, whether it's job, whether it's school, whether it's family, whatever it is that limits our ability to be truly free, right? So we recognize that element. And so, again, this idea that there is no life on the horizon, right? There's no one else there. I mean, we do see maybe a subtle indication of a bike right below the home, right? Which does indicate that it's probably not hers, right? That's probably someone else that lives there. But then there's a ladder. So there's obviously someone that's living there or working there in some way, shape, or form. But we don't really see them. And so this feels lonely. It feels isolated. It feels as though there's this longing to connect, but an inability to do it, right? So again, think about the forest between the trees, right? Connecting the dots. How do Woods, Hopper's, and Wyeth's works display a similar nostalgia for a time gone by? What are they longing for? What has been lost? Right? And again, and I think this nostalgia continues on even to this day in the United States. There's a feeling that we've lost something. We want to make something great again. We want to, there's this sense that something is off and we need to reconnect it. Why do you think so many artists have concerns about their contemporary worlds? And that's a common theme throughout this class. What are they concerned about, right? So something to think about. And then I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Norman Rockwell, one of the most famous American artists representing similar ideas. Rockwell is regarded as one of the most iconic American illustrators. He is known for representing Americana, the spirit of the times. With everyday scenes of small-town life, his works display witty humor and folksy insights. He produced over 300 covers for the Saturday Evening Post, and his art remains an enduring symbol of national values, aspirations, and a collective memory of a romanticized past. And so, in some ways, he has given the United States an image of what life used to be, even though he's representing something that's romanticized. And so it's a kind of an interesting tension, thinking about surrealism and our disconnect from seeing the actual world. He has presented Christmas the way Christmas should be. He presents childhood the way child should be. Even though he's not really representing reality, he's representing a romanticized reality. But his images are so powerful that they have changed our memory of the past, right? Here is the catch, where three boys come in, and two of them are extremely happy. They have, caught 2 or 3 fish, but the one in the middle only caught a very tiny one, and it looks like caught it with a stick. I'm not sure exactly what happened with that, but definitely didn't have the same kind of day that the other two have. I mean, we've all had this kind of day before, so we can all relate to that. But this idea of childhood innocence, walking barefoot, torn and tattered clothes, but a smile on the face, a straw hat, giving us this essence of this kind of simpler life, this simpler time of a time gone by. This one was before the shot. This one's kind of interesting because the young man pulls down his trousers. He's going to get a booster or some type of shot in his backside, and as he bends down, it seems as though he is inspecting the credentials of the doctor to make sure he is legit. So part of Norman Rockwell is capturing the idea of innocence and an innocent America, a kind of dreamy America that doesn't have conflict, America that doesn't have problems. If we could all just, get along and go harmoniously through our life, wouldn't it be wonderful? But he doesn't really confront the ongoing problems of his day, and so a lot of criticism comes from his ability to ignore the greater social, political problems of his day. But he gives us a sense of, life is just simple and nice. This kind of romanticized image of childhood innocence of a time gone by, right? Or the runaway, where this child is running away, goes into the cafe, and all of a sudden the police officer looks at him and gives them this kind of authoritarian look. The idea here is it takes a village to raise a boy or a child. He's given this kind of look that you better go back home, and then you have the nice little handkerchief and stick with all of his valued belongings in it at the very bottom as he stops in this cafe and has a something to eat or a drink. Or the tired sales girl at Christmas Eve, right? This idea that she is so exhausted by all of the shopping, all of the kids coming in, all of them wanting their toys, these toys for Christmas, and it's just complete pandemonium and chaos. And the sales girl at the end of the day takes off her shoes and completely collapses on top of a toy truck, right? And so you have all of the bills of sales on her lap getting ready to fall down, and just getting the sense of this anxiety, this kind of chaos and busyness of the shopping season. What he doesn't recognize, though, is that what he's celebrating here is a very Midwestern and middle class kind of life, right? The people that are going shopping at these stores that have that luxury, that ability, are going to be from a certain socioeconomic status, right? Woods and Rockwell display a folksiness about their romantic vision of America. In many ways, they represent America that never was, but seems to exist only in the nostalgic imaginations of some. Many see their works as a way America should be. However, they leave a lot of people out of their idealized vision. Who did they leave out, and why might this be problematic, right? Especially as this is so influential as we think about the way America was or the way America should have been. Why might that be problematic? Some thoughts to think about. I won't answer them for you. I've given you some thoughts to think about in those terms, but I'll let you guys kind of connect the dots and think a little bit more deeply about art. All right, let's take a look at another couple of art movements that are happening around the same time and how they're responding to it, and some similar trends that we start seeing. The Russian Revolution, just quickly here. In 1917, the rest of Europe had undergone political changes. During the 19th century, Russia had not maintained a feudal society. Sorry if I can read that correctly. Rooted in the old world, Nicholas Romanov II became Tsar of Russia at the time of growing social and political unrest. To make matters worse, Russia was severely behind Europe in terms of the Industrial Revolution and military advancements. They entered World War I unprepared and ill-equipped to confront other world powers. Nicholas II left Russia to lead the soldiers on the front line, leaving his wife Alexandra to keep the peace at home. Meanwhile, Lenin was in Switzerland after being exiled for his revolutionary ideas. Germany funded Lenin to return to Russia to start a revolution and end Russia's military campaign. Lenin formed the Bolshevik Party and overthrew the government. He used Karl Marx's ideas to push for an idealized society, a new society that's going to focus more on the working class rather than the upper class, right? So these are the ideas that are going through his mind, similar to what we see with realism, right? Focusing on the plight of the poor. Lenin comes back and wants to form a revolution to change society, to form a society that's more focused on the poor. It doesn't really work, but he has a lot of high ideals and high aspirations, right? So there's the war going on in Europe, World War I, World War II. Germany and Russia were on opposite sides, and so Germany says, hey, why don't we just try to take them out of the war by creating a revolution at home? Russia's already a little bit tenuous and seeming as though they're leaning towards that direction. Lenin is a revolutionary. Maybe he can create a conflict and end the war, and that's exactly what happens. This is art that's associated with Lenin, though. I want to take a look at Russian suprematism and his aspirations, right? His aspirations is to move art towards abstraction, which is very different from what's happening in American regionalism, but it's similar to what's happening in German expressionism, right? So this is the art that Lenin promoted. Karl Malevich was one of the major artists for Lenin, and the focus of the suprematists was to focus on abstraction, line, color, brushstroke, and the purity of shape. They wanted to display pure feeling in art. Art no longer needs external reality. It just should focus on inspiring people emotionally. It should focus on this utopian ideal to lead us to a new end. And it should suggest that humanity's supremacy over nature, that this kind of belief in science and technology. Here's what Malevich says about his works. He says, I transformed myself into the zero of form. I destroyed the ring of the horizon and escaped from the circle of things. From the horizon rings that confines the artist and the forms of nature. So we need to be unshackled from visual reality and do something different. This one, the airplane flying, it could be a couple of things. It could be maybe this is the kind of the airplane, and this is kind of the front of it. I'm not really sure. Or it could be the airplane overhead looking down, and this is the view of the buildings below. But again, it's embracing humanity's supremacy over nature, humanity's ability to fly in this particular case, displaying the purity of form, just very simple shapes, very simple colors, and nothing really overt that's being represented. In a similar way to what we see with futurism and kind of embracing the future and moving towards abstraction, right? So that's kind of the first movement of the Russian Revolution. But then Stalin comes in and he says, you know what? That stuff doesn't make sense to the common people, so I'm going to make art easy to understand where it glorifies the workers, it's realistic, it promotes the government's agenda, and it rejects an individual style. It should all be about coming together collectively and celebrating what makes America, or what makes Russia, Russia, right? Now, interestingly, I want us to think about these in terms of their objectives. Both Lenin and Stalin saw art as a means to inspire people, yet each approached this inspiration differently. want you to think about the differences and consider which style would be most effective at inspiring people, right? Is it this that's going to be more inspirational, or is it this that's going to be more inspirational? And more importantly, why is that, right? One more art movement. This is happening in Nazi Germany. This is Hitler's art style that he imposed. Again, he wants to focus on people coming together, the idea of the essence of German heritage, German life, this kind of romanticized image of the way Germany is or the way Germany should be. But again, focusing on, this is 1930s Nazi Germany, focusing on the Aryan race and the superiority of whites over other races. And so it's also to promote that political agenda. But he saw art as a means of inspiring people towards his vision, or having a very specific, narrow vision of how the world should be, where he's taking works of Matisse and Chagall, and not these ones, but taking other works of them, of other artists, modern artists, and burning them, and suggesting that these are problematic. And so I want us to think about why that is. Why does he see this art as problematic, but this art as superior? Right? And that gets us to think about art a little bit more deeply about what's going on here, because they are suggesting that the world around them is corrupt, and we need to find these primitive, earlier forms to connect with. Hitler is suggesting that the modern world is corrupt, and they need to return to kind of this earlier essence of, of Europe or something. Similar kind of response, different aesthetic, right? They're suggesting this aesthetic is found within more abstraction, connecting emotionally, or rejecting Western tradition. He suggests something quite different. I think that's kind of interesting to think about. And think about this in connection with what's going on in Stalin's Russia and what's going on with American regionalism. There's an interesting thought about why these kind of works of art focus on this visual reality. Why is it such a prominent part of, the Germany? Why is it such a prominent part of Russia? And why is it such a prominent part of the United States? As they're representing the common man, why is this their kind of tendency? Where artists are suggesting this kind of art is for the common man. This is about not being trained, where you don't have to go to an academy to be able to do this art. This art is about trying to connect to our primal essence of who we really are, right? So this is art for the common man. But when the government gets involved, this tends to be the art for the common man. So it's an interesting kind of tension that is teased out. And I talk about this more, there's some shameless advertising. I talk about this more in my art and propaganda course, to think about this overlap between government oversight and art and some of the complexities that have happened historically about those dynamics. All right, we'll leave off with American regionalism, and we'll take a look at abstract expressionism in the next lecture.